Well, welcome to this talk about Queen Elizabeth II designs and proofs for Falkland Islands stamps issued in the 1960s and 70s. I say right up front as well, apologies for some of the illustrations, particularly early on. I took them in 2014 with a camera, no scanner available at the time when I visited the islands, but they come out pretty well, and you'll see as we go through, they're pretty good. Most of the images come from material in the post office vault at that time, although some were in the file for that particular stamp issue held in the Jane Cameron National Archives. As we discussed in the discussion before this talk started, the material in the post office vault was transferred to the archives. This was certainly our recommendation from the study group members who were there around that time. So now it's been properly documented and is kept within the safe environment of the National Archives. There's a mass of material available, unadopted designs, artwork, designs with overlays of writing of the value, country name, etc. There's proofs and there's bromides. This is all together now with the correspondence files between the Falkland Islands government and the Crown agents in London. Now, the Crown agents were responsible for the commissioning of the artists, choosing of the printers, and overseeing the release of the issue. However, there are also things missing, often because the Crown agents asked for the return of the material, so that was sent back from the islands and was no longer in the archives. Typically, that might be things like interim designs. Now, I've picked a selection of issues. Obviously, I can't go through all the issues of the 1960s and 70s, but it gives you a feel of the material that's available in the islands, which many study group members and other people watching this video may not have seen before now. Now, we start with the Birds issue of 1960. Here we'd get quite excited if we saw just a single one of these vignette proofs of the Birds issue come at a stamp auction, and there'd be pretty fierce bidding for it. Well, here's quite a few of them. All the values are actually there in the islands, but only a few are shown on this slide. I don't think they are the final designs, but they're getting pretty close to it, and you can see the values are also attached to the vignettes. Now, I've particularly highlighted a couple of things here. First of all, there's a couple more of the vignettes, the 6penny and the 2 shilling. And the 6penny is quite interesting. As you can see, there's a note written to the right of it. Modifying nest looks like legs. And you'll probably agree as you look at the bottom of the vignette, there's 2 shadows on the nest that the black-browed albatross is sat on, and they do indeed look like legs. So that was modified for the final design. Also on the right here, you can see a series of frame designs, and there's several things that are changed between that and the issue. Although in general, the frame design colours here do match the values that were issued in 1960. But just to point you out at some of the differences, the stamps say postage and revenue on them. That didn't appear on the final stamps. It may have something to do with sales tax being phased out around that time. But the stamps were used for revenue purposes, but postage and revenue was removed. Now, the Queen's head is the other clue here of something different. The design here is a different design to the eventual head that was used on the issue. So look out for that when you see a bird stamp. These are very different here. And finally, just above this purple stamp that I've pulled out and highlighted, you can see 5D, 5p, written above it. Well, the issued set actually had a 5p halfpenny value, which sounds a very strange value, but during the design stage, the foreign surface rate changed from 5p to 5p halfpenny. And that changed on the 1st of April 1959 during this design phase. So that's why instead of a 5p stamp, the islands issued a 5p halfpenny. So a single stamp could pay that foreign letter rate. Now, talking the bird set as well, here's a mounted set of proofs, as you can see there in perforate, for the birds issue. And this was hanging on the wall of the post office. So incredible, beautiful looking set of proofs. And there it was hanging on there. You can see at the bottom there, proofs of new issue 1960. Now I've taken a little selection as well from the flowers set. These are actually designs for the decimal issue, as you can see, because they say half a p and 1p on them. They're about A4 size boards, these, so they're quite large and show the design up wonderfully. And then over it is a plastic overlay, and that contains the Falkland Islands name, the name of the flower, in both in Latin and English, and the decimal value. So this shows how the writing then matches in with the design. So it's useful for the designer to put this overlay on and to show how the island name, etc., can feature amongst the actual design of the flower. We've obviously jumped a bit from the birds issue to the flower issue, ignoring some of the 1960s sets, such as Radio, set in 1962, the Battle of the Falkland Islands in 1964, and also some of the later sets as well that came out around the flowers issue. Now, why I've done that is that I did produce a monograph back in 2015 that looked at the design material and proofs for those issues. It's called the QEII Sterling Commemoratives, and that's why I haven't shown some of that just as a repeat during this talk. And there's the 25p and the pound set. As I say, these are A4 size boards, so they're wonderful to see in the archives. Now, the omnibus issues were treated slightly differently to the designs that were developed and produced specifically for the islands. For the omnibus issues produced for many colonies in the Commonwealth, most of the design work was carried out by Crown agents in London without any referral to the colony at all. The first sight the colony may have of the issue would be a set of proofs or bromides for the issue. This means a lot less material exists for these issues, but the files of correspondence are still there. And some of these proofs are in those files, like this one for the Red Cross issue. Now, apologies for the fuzziness of this slide, but it does show a typical issue with a proof and bromide still in the islands. The bromide is a sort of black and white contact print, but here with the Shakespeare issue, it does look a bit like the actual printed stamp, as that was produced in black and white. A not quite final proof, again in perforate, was supplied as well with the comment, approved subject to the removal of the white dots on Her Majesty's neck and on the upper forehead of the reproduction of Shakespeare. And then there's a date there as well, 9/1/64, so prepared early in January before the issue. For the International Cooperation Year issue in 1965, proofs are in the archives for both values, and they're on Harrison presentation cards. Now, you occasionally seen proofs like this offered for sale. For example, I've seen some for the FIGAS issue, the Government Air Service issue in 1969, which has been on Format International printers presentation cards, and they've been on sale fairly recently. But so some of these do exist, but they are pretty scarce, and there's some very nice ones there for the International Cooperation Year. Now, the 1968 human rights issue was a sort of omnibus. However, each country that took part in it had an individual design. So each individual colony would create their own designs, and the Falklands were pretty stumped about what they should look like. Correspondence says they didn't like the Fire a Bell designs initially and suggested some designs from a Sieglind Button, who I think was a local, instead. Now, it appears that Crown agent used Farah Bell to work on this local design, and sent a rough back that you can see here, rough design, again with an overlay to show how the Falkland Islands and the human rights here symbol goes above it. But they also sent some swatches for the colours of the various denominations, and you can see those here on the right hand side. I mentioned before, these, like the designs, were typically about A4 size, so that, again, very interesting to look at. I've reproduced a little bit of a memo here. The issue brought complaints from the islands that the stamps wouldn't actually stick to the covers. Harrison's had recently switched from gum Arabic paste to a PVA glue, and it was suggested this needed a lot more wetting to make the stamp stick to the paper. Now, Crown agents were pretty clever because they sold this to the islands that this was actually a good thing because it stopped the sheets of the stamps sticking together so much in storage. But I'm not sure the islanders were very happy that their stamps seemed to be flying off their letters. We now come to an issue that was some 6 years from concept to being delivered to the post office. As you can see from this memo, there was an idea for what was a sort of tourism and industry issue, a slightly strange thing, but it provided such diverse subjects as sheep farming, trout fishing, peat cutting and telemetry. Remember, the islands had a European Space Research Organisation, or ESRO, station for tracking satellites that passed over the Falkland Islands and relaying the signals back to Germany. Here are some designs for this issue. Not mentioned in the memo was local shipping, but a design was prepared for a twopenny value. I think this is quite attractive. Here are the sixpenny and shilling values for nature sanctuaries and for peat cutting. Now, the design on the left may ring a bell, as this one was eventually used in the issued tourism set some 6 years later in 1974. But the peat cutting design, which was mentioned in the issue briefing, never saw the light of day. The 2 shilling design was based on trout fishing, as it was in the design brief. Again, this was taken forward and used in the eventual tourism issue. The industries and tourism set was then planned to be issued in 1970, but it was further delayed. As I said, it took until 1974 for the issue to take place, and these designs were added to the issue. And there'd been the change to decimal currency in the meantime. So here's the first seal design reworked for the tourism issue, together with a new design on bird watching, with a picture of a military starling produced by designer John Cooter. And again, you can see here the overlays of Falkland Islands, the title tourism, and the English and Latin name for the animals. So here is the design for the other issued tourism stamp, the Rockhopper Penguin, the 5p stamp, and also you can see the imperfect proofs for the eventual tourism issue in March 1974, after this 6-year wait. Now, Crown agents provided A4 designs of the denominations, together with the letters printed as well, for the Battle of the River Plate issue in 1974 for the island government to look at. The correspondence with the islands, by the way, was typically with the Colonial Secretary, who would then use government officials, the Stamp Committee, and even local artists to review the designs and comment on them. Now, it was agreed in the islands that the German ship Graf Spee should be portrayed as part of the set. Indeed, sets of the stamps would be sent to Germany to be given to survivors of the battle. So the feedback rejected the design for the Graf Spee, as it was felt to be shown as a ship as she was at the time of the battle, and not in the rather ignominious state of being scuttled, as they say in the memo. So this design here of the Graf Spee was rejected. This resulted in a redesign of the stamp, and you can see it here, together with a couple of other designs from the issue. Now, 1974 also provided a rather attractive pair of stamps for the centenary of the birth of Sir Winston Churchill. These were produced by the artist Julian Vasarhelyi, a Hungarian-born artist living in London, who produced stamp designs for over 100 countries. But I think this was his only Falklands design. But they are very attractive, and you can see them there with the overlays put over them as well, and also the bromides that were attached to the design boards and filed in the archives. Now, at the time, there was a considerable degree of friction in 1974 between the study group and the Falkland Islands over design of stamps, and especially this item here, the miniature sheet for the Churchill issue. Chairman Reg Leppard of the study group wrote, "The decision to issue a souvenir sheet for the coming Churchill centenary only aggravates a sadly declining standard." Now the governor responded, "If your study group wishes to elaborate further why it dislikes the issue of souvenir sheets, we will certainly consider your representations." The coinage issue was proposed for 1975 as the first Falkland Islands coins were produced. And some interesting things can be seen in this memo and the accompanying bromides of the issue. First of all, there was meant to be a dreaded miniature sheet again for this issue, which would have included a stamp size label. This would have been very interesting to see. Secondly, the stamps were meant to be originally issued in denominations that matched the coins that were depicted on the stamps. Probably in the end, this didn't match the postage rates, and also, probably more important, at 18.5p total, wouldn't bring in enough revenue. Finally, there was a late change in two of the values on the bromide. The 5p was increased to 5.5p to match the airmail postcard rate that changed in August 1975, and the top three values changed from 6p, 8p and 10p as shown here to actually 8p, 10p and 16p. But interesting to see the different changes that took place as the design progressed. The Telecommunications Issue had some rough designs, and some of these are pretty rough. Probably produced locally, and these seem to celebrate the telex equipment in the islands. Luckily, looking at them, these were rejected. Now, the three designs on this page can be seen to provide the themes for the eventually issued stamps, and two of them, the telex globe and the inter-island communication between Port Stanley and Fox Bay, are pretty close to the issued stamps as shown in the proofs here. Only the ship-to-shore design was radically altered for the final designs. And you can see it, ship-to-shore communications here on the right-hand side. And there's the telex globe reworked as well, without its overlay. The archives also hold a couple of worked up designs, very colourful and would have been quite interesting if issued, especially the pink and blue combination, and that sort of combination of colours was taken forward into the telex globe stamp that we just saw. Now, the first direct flight issue was delayed from the 25th anniversary in April 1977, eventually being released in April 1978 to rather strangely commemorate the 26th anniversary of the first direct flight from Southampton to Stanley in 1952. One thing to notice on these designs, that the issue was originally celebrating the first airmail flight, and you can see that there in the captions. Maybe there was some dispute over whether this was the first airmail flight, given the mail flown by HMS Exeter in the islands before World War II. Here you can see the sketches from the designer Leslie McCombie. He died in 2021, aged 94, and he was a very active ecologist He was also a communist, but he was also a graphic designer. And as you can see, these are pretty close to the ones that were produced eventually. And we can actually see those on the next slide. Here you see these rough designs by Leslie McCombie turned into the painted final designs. Very attractive they are too. The centenary of the first postage stamp issue in 1978 was designed by John Cooter with input from Ronnie Spafford. The proofs from Bradbury Wilkinson are also illustrated here on the blue background in perforate again, and you can see them at the bottom of the screen. Maybe Ronnie's input can be seen in the first designs, which show a black franc and a red franc on the 2p and 10p stamps, together with a map of the islands on the 6p, and probably the dubious celebration of especially the burning down of the town hall and post office in 1944. Also, there's some interesting facts on the black and red franc illustrated. You can see the black franc was sold at Robson Lowe auctions in 1974 for £2,200. And the red franc on the 10p design was sold at H.R. Harmer for £1,900 in 1973. Now, in honour of Stefan being out in the Falkland Islands, I thought we'd look at one stamp design here of particular interest to him. It was based on this photograph of the post office at Fox Bay, and the design's still in the files. It's interesting that the post office annex, where the museum is today, seems to get missed off the design. It's also interesting to see this design part way through the process with the 5p value against the Fox Bay stamp rather than the issued 3p, as you can see on the right. And the sky's rather a beigey colour rather than the eventual blue sky, as again shown on the design on the right, with its overlay of country name, etc. And here are some bromides of the design part way through the process. You can see that the denominations of the issued stamps are still wrong at this stage. Interestingly, the issue date for the islands was delayed to a problem with the perforating machine at Bradbury Wilkinson. Now, this also led to a complaint in the memorandum reproduced here about the centering and perforations on the stamps. A pity that we seem to be missing the photocopies that were copied then and sent to London. It would be interesting to see those. Now, not all the copies we have look fine, but they probably are better than the ones that were really bad. So I wonder if the offending sheets were retained and destroyed rather than issued to the population. But do go and have a look at your Centenary of the Postage stamp blocks that you might have, because you will see some strange perforations going on. Some very colourful designs exist for the centenary of the death of Sir Rowland Hill. Now, the designs using the centenary 1933 pound stamp never made it through the design process to issue, which seems a bit of a pity. And the vivid background colours were toned down, although the turned engraving of the stamps was used. Here are three attractive and hand-painted, note they're hand-painted designs, that did eventually, with a bit of tweaking, become the issued stamps. And the lowest value, the 3p, did contain the coronation penny, the penny black on the 25p stamp, and the Falkland Islands 5s George V on the 33p stamp. Here's three imperforate proofs from Questa printers for the issued stamps, together with the imperforate 33p in the middle of the miniature sheet that was issued for that stamp. Now, the opening of Stanley Airport was again a much delayed set because it was originally designed for 1976 as construction began. It was also delayed past the first flight, which took place in November 1977. and it was held back until the official opening of the airport in May 1979. Now, designs were asked for locals, and here are 3 examples in the files at the archives, together with the bromides of the actual release set, so you can compare them. Now, construction with you can be seen with what might be called the Leaning Tower of Cape Pembroke Lighthouse in the background. There's a stamp on air traffic control and a rather threatening thundercloud on the Meteorological Service stamp. Here are some designs from Louise Laverack. She was staying in Stanley for a few months with her boyfriend Grant, who was doing a photography project. Now, I rather like her designs. She was asked to take her designs forward, but then they were rejected by the Stamp Advisory Committee in the islands. This meant that the government wrote to the Crown agents saying they were a bit of a loss over the designs. This may have been another reason for the delay of the issue from 1976 onwards. Louise did contribute something to the eventual design, as the government wrote to the Crown agents saying that the silhouette of the aircraft that you can see on the right there should be taken to the forward to the final design concept. The silhouette concept started to be worked up, and here are a couple of very colourful rejected designs. I wonder what had been thought of them if these had been issued. And you can see the airport terminal building pretty small there in the background on both the stamps. Now, these designs here are far closer to the issued stamps. The 6p design eventually had the white South America removed to only show the tip of the continent as in the blue silhouette. And that became the 11p stamp. Obviously a change of aircraft down to 1 and slightly different as well. The 11p design on the top right here became the 3p stamp, you can see, with a smaller aircraft. Notice as well that the Queen's head was replaced rather with an E2R instead on the issued stamps. Here are some photocopies of designs that were sent as the design progressed. Note the globe stamp, which is very similar to the Telecommunications 40p, and maybe why it was rejected. And it has a note underneath, new airport terminal building and islander, as a suggestion for a replacement design. Well, here, the brief, to say the least, was a bit brief itself, but it was produced. The design was worked up for a terminal building plus aircraft stamp. Maybe the perspective of the aircraft looking like it might land on the terminal roof wasn't approved, so this again became a rejected design. 1979 also provided an issue to celebrate the centenary of the Falkland Islands joining the UPU. Only 5 years earlier, in 1974, there'd also been a UPU issue, which actually celebrated the centenary of the UPU itself. And this was an issue that had opprobrium poured on it in an editorial by Ronnie Spafford in the Upland Goose. I'll read you a bit from it. Of course, the most ridiculous issue is the UPU issue. It is almost ludicrous to think of a stagecoach trundling across the peat bogs, stone runs and roadless tracks of the Falkland Islands. While there was once one experimental catapult airmail flight from HMS Exeter to Port San Carlos in 1934, there was certainly no service in the Falklands in 1920. And what the first UK aerial post of 1911 had to do with the postal service of the Falkland Islands cannot be imagined. Well, here is the design of the offending 2p mail coach, together with a really nice hand painting of the eventual 4 designs that turned into the issue. At least the 1979 design did feature some Falklands related ways of getting the mail around. For example, mail dropped by aircraft, which was being used a lot, especially for urgent supplies such as medicines. This was featured on the 3p stamp. Falkland Islands was eventually all on one line, not in the two lines shown here, and the 3p value was dropped down the issued stamp. It was also felt that the aircraft flying directly at the viewer didn't work, so the design was changed to show it banking, as shown on the right-hand side. Ronnie Spafford suggested in 1974 that perhaps a picture of mail delivery by horseback would have been a delight to philatelists worldwide. Well, I think a postcard here, which is in the files, of mail being taken by horseback. It's Hayburn T13T, featuring crossing of the river by Port Sussex, and actually on the horses are Mr. and Mrs. George Bonner and Robert Reeve. I love the Hayburn information. There in the top left, you can actually see Mrs. George Bonner on her horse. This became the basis of the design for the 11p stamp. So we finish here with a scan of the bromides and designs partway through the design process for the 1970 Defence Force issue. As you can see, the denominations for the tuppenny, the sixpenny and the shilling designs are in a black shield, which wasn't in the eventually issued design. To me, these concept designs, first designs and proofs give a fascinating insight into production of the issues we know from collecting, and show in a few cases what might have been. There is still a mass of material that I haven't shown in the files, and illustrations that can provide research writings for a long time, and is a really worthwhile reason for a trip to the Jane Cameron National Archives in Port Stanley. Thank you very much indeed.